The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Ray Mill House as Camilla Parker Bowles stepped out onto her terrace with her usual cup of Earl Grey tea. She had no idea that this peaceful Tuesday would mark the beginning of the most extraordinary discovery in modern royal history. The Duchess of Cornwall had been living quietly at her countryside retreat, enjoying the simple pleasures of gardening and reading, when an unexpected letter arrived that would change everything. The envelope bore the official seal of the Royal Collection Trust, and inside was a formal notice that made Camilla's heart skip a beat. Due to recent changes in royal protocols and inheritance laws, certain properties owned by senior royals would undergo mandatory historical assessments. Ray Mill House, her beloved sanctuary, was on the list. The letter explained that royal historians and archivists would need access to conduct a thorough examination of the property and its contents. Camilla felt a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. She had purchased Ray Mill House years before her marriage to Prince Charles, and it had always been her private refuge. The thought of strangers rummaging through her personal belongings felt invasive. However, the letter made it clear that this was not a request, but a royal decree, stamped with the authority of the Crown Estate. 3 days later, a convoy of black vehicles arrived at the property. Leading the team was Dr. Margaret Thornfield, a distinguished royal historian who had spent decades studying the artifacts and treasures of the British monarchy. Accompanying her were several specialists in antiques, a team of careful movers, and 2 representatives from the Royal Collection Trust. They arrived with scanning equipment, cameras, and detailed documentation forms. Camilla greeted them with polite courtesy, though her discomfort was evident. She had always prided herself on being a private person, and the idea of having every corner of her home examined felt deeply personal. Dr. Thornfield, sensing her unease, explained that the process was purely procedural and that they would be as respectful as possible. The team began their work methodically, starting with the main living areas. They photographed furniture, examined paintings, and carefully catalogued every item of potential historical significance. Camilla watched nervously as they moved through her sitting room, handling her personal photographs and cherished mementos. Everything seemed routine until they reached the study on the 2nd floor. It was in this cozy room, lined with bookshelves and filled with afternoon light, that the first unusual discovery occurred. While examining an antique writing desk that Camilla had inherited from her grandmother, one of the specialists noticed something peculiar. The desk appeared to be much older than initially thought, and certain design elements suggested it might have royal provenance. Dr. Thornfield was called over to examine the piece more closely. She ran her hands along the intricate woodwork, noting the quality of the craftsmanship and the style of the brass fittings. What caught her attention most was a small, barely visible crown symbol carved into the underside of one of the drawers. This marking was consistent with furniture that had once belonged to the royal household. Camilla watched with growing curiosity as the historian carefully photographed the marking and made detailed notes. When asked about the desk's history, Camilla explained that it had been in her family for generations, passed down through her grandmother's line. She had never questioned its origins, simply treasuring it as a family heirloom. The examination of the desk revealed more intriguing details. Hidden compartments were discovered, which was common in antique furniture but particularly interesting given the potential royal connection. One compartment contained old letters tied with faded ribbon, while another held what appeared to be jewelry boxes. The team carefully removed these items, treating them with the reverence due to potential historical artifacts. As the day progressed, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. What had started as a routine assessment was taking on the excitement of a treasure hunt. The team's movements became more deliberate, their conversations more animated. Camilla found herself drawn into the mystery, her initial reluctance giving way to genuine fascination. The discovery in the study prompted Dr. Thornfield to expand the search to other areas of the house. If one piece of potentially royal furniture had found its way to Ray Mill House, there might be others. The team decided to extend their stay and conduct a more thorough investigation of the entire property. That evening, as the team packed up their equipment for the day, Dr. Thornfield approached Camilla with a thoughtful expression. She explained that the initial findings were highly unusual and potentially significant. The markings on the desk, combined with its age and craftsmanship, suggested it might have belonged to Queen Victoria's court. If this was true, it would be an extraordinary find, as many pieces from that era had been lost or destroyed over the years. Camilla listened with amazement as the historian outlined the possibilities. The idea that she had been unknowingly living with royal treasures seemed almost impossible to believe. Yet the evidence was compelling, and Dr. Thornfield's expertise was unquestionable. The historian requested permission to bring in additional specialists and equipment to continue the investigation. As the team departed, Camilla found herself looking at her home with new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every ornament, every family heirloom suddenly seemed to hold the potential for mystery and discovery. She spent the evening walking through her rooms, touching familiar objects and wondering about their true origins. The quiet country house that had always been her sanctuary was about to become the center of one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries in recent royal history. What had begun as an unwanted intrusion was transforming into an adventure that would captivate the entire royal family and change Camilla's understanding of her own family's past forever. Sleep came fitfully that night as Camilla's mind raced with possibilities. Tomorrow would bring more experts, more equipment, and potentially more discoveries. She had no way of knowing that the writing desk was just the beginning, and that the real treasures lay hidden in places no one had thought to look. The second day of the investigation brought an entirely different energy to Ray Mill House. Word of the previous day's discoveries had reached the highest levels of the royal household, and additional resources were being mobilized. Dr. Thornfield arrived with a larger team, including specialists in Victorian-era artifacts, experts in royal jewelry, and even a genealogist who might help trace the connection between Camilla's family and the royal collection. Prince Charles himself had called the night before, his voice filled with excitement and curiosity. The possibility that his wife had been unknowingly safeguarding pieces of royal history fascinated him, and he expressed his intention to visit once the investigation progressed further. Camilla felt a mixture of pride and nervousness at the thought of such attention being focused on her quiet retreat. The morning began with a more detailed examination of the items found in the writing desk. The letters, carefully preserved in protective covers, revealed correspondence dating back to the 1880s. The handwriting was elegant and formal, characteristic of the Victorian era. Most intriguingly, several letters bore letterheads from royal residences, including Balmoral Castle and Osborne House. Dr. Thornfield worked with a specialist in historical documents to decipher the faded ink. The letters appeared to be communications between members of Queen Victoria's extended family and various courtiers. While many were routine correspondence about social events and family matters, others contained references to gifts, inheritances, and the movement of valuable items between royal residences. One letter, in particular, caught the attention of the entire team. Dated 1887, it was written by Princess Beatrice, Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, to someone identified only as dearest cousin Margaret. The letter mentioned the lovely pieces from Mama's collection that were being entrusted to safekeeping during a period of uncertainty. The letter went on to describe specific items, including the sapphire set that belonged to Auntie Adelaide and Papa's favorite snuff box with the diamond crown. Camilla listened with fascination as the historian explained the significance of these references. Princess Beatrice had been one of Queen Victoria's most trusted daughters, often serving as her private secretary and confidant. If she had indeed been responsible for safeguarding valuable items from the royal collection, it would explain how they might have ended up in private hands. The genealogist, Dr. Patricia Worthington, began investigating Camilla's family tree with renewed interest. She discovered that Camilla's great-great-grandmother had indeed been named Margaret, and there were indications that she had moved in aristocratic circles during the late Victorian period. More research would be needed to establish a definitive connection, but the evidence was mounting. While the document analysis continued, another team focused on the physical search of the house. They had developed a systematic approach, using ground-penetrating radar to check for hidden compartments and metal detectors to identify potentially valuable items concealed within walls or floors. The technology revealed several anomalies that warranted further investigation. The first major discovery of the day came from an unexpected source. While examining the conservatory that Camilla had added to the house several years earlier, the team noticed that the foundation work had disturbed what appeared to be a much older structure. Careful excavation revealed the remains of a Victorian-era outbuilding, possibly a summer house or storage facility. Within the ruins of this structure, the archaeologists found a sealed metal container, green with age but still intact. The container was carefully extracted and brought into the house for examination. Dr. Thornfield approached it with the reverence of someone who understood they might be opening a time capsule from the past. Inside the container, wrapped in oiled cloth that had remarkably preserved them, were several extraordinary items. The first was a jeweled brooch, featuring a magnificent sapphire surrounded by diamonds, set in an intricate gold mounting that bore the unmistakable hallmarks of royal jewelry. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and the design matched descriptions found in royal inventory records from the 1880s. Accompanying the brooch were several other pieces: a pearl necklace with a distinctive clasp featuring the royal cipher, a gentleman's pocket watch engraved with the royal arms, and most remarkably, a small crown that appeared to be designed for ceremonial use rather than regular wear. Each piece was photographed extensively and carefully documented before being secured in protective cases. Camilla watched in amazement as these treasures emerged from their century-long hiding place. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. These weren't just valuable antiques. They were pieces of British history that had been missing from the royal collection for over 100 years. The implications were staggering. Dr. Thornfield explained that the items would need to be authenticated by experts at the Royal Collection, but their initial assessment suggested they were genuine pieces from Queen Victoria's era. The quality of the workmanship, the materials used, and the distinctive royal markings all pointed to their authenticity. As news of the discovery spread, the atmosphere at Ray Mill House became increasingly charged with excitement. Phone calls were made to Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, and other royal residences. Senior members of the royal household began making arrangements to visit and assess the findings personally. Camilla found herself at the center of a historical event that was rapidly gaining momentum. Media outlets had begun to pick up rumors of a significant discovery, though details were being carefully controlled by the palace press office. The last thing anyone wanted was for treasure hunters or curious onlookers to descend on the peaceful countryside property. The afternoon brought another significant development. While examining the main bedroom, specialists discovered that one of the wall panels was actually a carefully concealed door. Behind it lay a small room that had apparently been used for storage. This hidden chamber contained several trunks and boxes that had remained undisturbed for decades. The largest trunk, made of fine leather with brass fittings, bore a small plate engraved with the initials VR and Victoria Regina. Inside, carefully packed in tissue paper and silk, were more treasures: paintings in ornate frames, delicate porcelain figurines, and a collection of books bound in leather and gold. Each item told a story of royal life in the Victorian era. Among the most significant finds was a portrait miniature of Queen Victoria herself, painted on ivory and set in a frame of diamonds and emeralds. Such portraits were typically commissioned as gifts for close family members and trusted friends. The presence of this particular piece suggested a very personal connection between the royal family and whoever had originally hidden these treasures. As the day drew to a close, the team had cataloged over 30 items of potential royal provenance. The magnitude of the discovery was unprecedented in modern times. Dr. Thornfield announced that additional experts would arrive the following day, including representatives from the Victoria and Albert Museum and specialists in royal regalia. Camilla sat in her sitting room that evening, surrounded by the carefully documented evidence of the day's discoveries. Her quiet country retreat had been transformed into something resembling an archaeological dig site, complete with conservation equipment, photography stations, and security personnel. The woman who had simply wanted to tend her garden and read her books in peace had become the custodian of one of the most remarkable treasure troves in British royal history. The third day dawned with an air of anticipation that seemed to electrify the very atmosphere around Ray Mill House. Prince Charles arrived early, accompanied by a small entourage that included Sir Hugh Roberts, the surveyor of the Queen's works of art, and Lady Sarah Chatto, Princess Margaret's daughter, whose expertise in art history had made her invaluable to the royal collection. The prince's excitement was palpable as he greeted Camilla with a kiss and immediately asked to see the discoveries. Dr. Thornfield had prepared a careful presentation of the findings, laying out the authenticated pieces on tables covered with protective cloth. Prince Charles moved slowly from item to item, his trained eye taking in every detail. His knowledge of royal history and artifacts was extensive, and his reactions confirmed what the experts already suspected. These were genuine pieces from the royal collection that had been missing for over a century. The portrait miniature of Queen Victoria particularly captivated him. He studied it through a magnifying glass, noting the artist's technique and the quality of the gems in the frame. "This is extraordinary," he murmured, his voice filled with wonder. "I remember seeing references to this piece in the royal archives, but it was thought to have been lost during the chaos after Victoria's death." Lady Sarah was equally impressed by the paintings that had been discovered in the hidden chamber. Several were works by artists who had regularly painted for the royal family, including watercolors of royal residences and portraits of family members. One painting in particular caught her attention, a charming scene of children playing in the gardens of Osborne House, signed by a court artist whose works were highly prized by the royal family. As the authentication process continued, Dr. Worthington, the genealogist, presented her preliminary findings about Camilla's family connections. She had discovered that Camilla's great-great-grandmother, Margaret Cubitt, had indeed been closely connected to the royal household. Margaret had served as a lady-in-waiting to one of Queen Victoria's daughters and had maintained correspondence with the royal family throughout her life. More significantly, Dr. Worthington had found records indicating that Margaret Cubitt had been entrusted with certain valuable items during the period of political uncertainty that followed Queen Victoria's death in 1901. The transition between monarchs often involved the redistribution of personal property, and it appeared that some items had been temporarily removed from royal residences for safekeeping. The genealogist explained that this practice was not uncommon during times of change in the royal household. Trusted family friends and loyal servants were sometimes asked to safeguard valuable or sentimental items until more stable arrangements could be made. Unfortunately, the chaos of the time, combined with the enormous quantity of items in the royal collection, meant that some pieces were simply forgotten or their locations lost to time. Prince Charles listened intently to this explanation, nodding as pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. He shared his own knowledge of family stories about missing items, including tales told by his grandmother, the Queen Mother, about treasures that had mysteriously disappeared during various royal transitions. The discovery at Ray Mill House was providing answers to questions that had puzzled royal historians for decades. The investigation took another dramatic turn when ground-penetrating radar revealed what appeared to be a larger structure buried beneath the garden. Initial scans suggested it might be the remains of a substantial outbuilding, possibly a carriage house or storage facility that had been demolished and forgotten over time. Prince Charles authorized immediate excavation, and a team of archaeological specialists was called in to assist. The excavation began carefully, with archaeologists working in small sections to preserve any artifacts that might be buried in the soil. Within hours, they had uncovered the corner of what appeared to be a stone foundation. As they worked deeper, the outline of a substantial building began to emerge. The construction style and materials suggested it dated to the late Victorian period, contemporary with the other discoveries. Camilla watched the excavation with fascination, still trying to process the magnitude of what was unfolding in her garden. The peaceful lawn where she had hosted quiet dinner parties and enjoyed morning coffee was being transformed into an active archaeological site. Workers in protective gear carefully sifted through soil, photographing and cataloging every find. The first significant discovery from the excavation came in the afternoon. Buried beneath what had once been the floor of the building, archaeologists found a large wooden chest, reinforced with iron bands and secured with a complex locking mechanism. The chest was carefully extracted and brought into the house for examination by conservation specialists. The lock proved to be a challenge, as forcing it open might damage whatever was inside. A specialist in antique mechanisms was called in, and after several hours of careful work, the chest was finally opened. The contents took everyone's breath away. Inside, carefully arranged in fitted compartments, was what appeared to be a complete set of royal regalia designed for ceremonial use. There was a small crown adorned with precious stones, a scepter topped with a magnificent ruby, an orb decorated with sapphires and diamonds, and various other ceremonial items. Each piece was crafted with the extraordinary skill that characterized royal jewelry of the Victorian era. Dr. Thornfield's hands trembled slightly as she examined these items. She explained that they appeared to be a set of regalia that might have been created for a junior member of the royal family, or possibly for use in specific ceremonies. The craftsmanship was identical to pieces in the current crown jewels. But these items were not part of the official regalia housed in the Tower of London. Prince Charles studied the items with growing amazement. He recalled stories his father had told him about various sets of ceremonial regalia that had been created for different occasions and family members throughout Victoria's long reign. Some sets had been given as gifts to other royal families, others had been kept for specific ceremonies, and some had simply disappeared over time. The discovery of this regalia set raised fascinating questions about royal protocol and the extent of the treasures that had been in Queen Victoria's possession. Historical records showed that she had commissioned numerous sets of ceremonial items, far more than were currently known to exist in the royal collection. The find at Ray Mill House suggested that many more treasures might be waiting to be rediscovered. As evening approached, additional security measures were put in place around the property. The value of the items discovered was already estimated to be in the millions of pounds, and their historical significance was immeasurable. Arrangements were made for the most valuable pieces to be transported to secure facilities at Windsor Castle, where they could be properly conserved and studied. Camilla found herself at the center of media attention as news of the discoveries began to leak to the press. Royal correspondents were camping outside the gates of Ray Mill House and helicopter news crews circled overhead. The palace press office was working overtime to manage the story and protect the privacy of the ongoing investigation. That evening, as Prince Charles and Camilla sat quietly in her sitting room, surrounded by the evidence of the day's extraordinary discoveries, they reflected on the implications of what had been found. The treasures represented not just monetary value, but a direct connection to their family's history and the rich heritage of the British monarchy. Prince Charles took Camilla's hand and smiled. "My dear," he said, "you've been the guardian of royal history without even knowing it. These discoveries will rewrite what we know about Victoria's reign and the royal collection. You've given the family an incredible gift." The fourth day brought with it an unexpected visitor who would forever change the significance of the discoveries at Ray Mill House. Queen Elizabeth II herself, despite her advanced age and typically reserved approach to such matters, had decided to personally examine the treasures that were being unearthed from Camilla's property. Her arrival was unprecedented and spoke volumes about the historical importance of what had been found. The Queen arrived in a modest convoy, accompanied only by her personal protection officers and Angela Kelly, her senior dresser and trusted confidant who had an encyclopedic knowledge of royal jewelry and accessories. As she stepped out of her vehicle, the Queen's sharp eyes immediately took in the transformed landscape of Ray Mill House, now bustling with archaeologists, historians, and conservation experts. Camilla greeted her mother-in-law with deep respect and obvious nervousness. Despite years of marriage to Charles, moments like these still reminded her of the weight of royal protocol and history. The Queen, however, put her at ease with a warm smile and her characteristic directness. "Well, Camilla," she said, "it appears you've been keeping some family secrets we didn't even know existed." Dr. Thornfield had prepared an extensive presentation for the Queen, but Her Majesty surprised everyone by asking to see the items in chronological order of their discovery. She wanted to understand not just what had been found, but how the investigation had unfolded. This methodical approach was typical of the Queen's analytical mind and her deep understanding of the importance of context in historical discoveries. The first item the Queen examined was the Victorian writing desk where everything had begun. She ran her hands over the carved crown symbol, her expression thoughtful. "This marking," she said to Dr. Thornfield, "I've seen it before. My father showed me similar pieces when I was a child. He said they marked furniture that had been specially commissioned for royal use but wasn't part of the official state collection." Angela Kelly was particularly fascinated by the jewelry pieces that had been discovered. As someone who had spent decades managing the Queen's extensive collection of personal jewelry, She could immediately recognize the quality and provenance of the Victorian pieces. The sapphire brooch in particular caught her attention. She studied it carefully through a magnifying glass before looking up with excitement. "Your Majesty," Angela said, her voice barely containing her enthusiasm, "I believe this is the Saxe-Coburg sapphire brooch. It's mentioned in several inventory lists from the 1880s, but it was thought to have been lost during the upheavals after Prince Albert's death." She pulled out a small notebook, where she kept detailed records of royal jewelry and showed the Queen a sketch that matched the brooch perfectly. The Queen's eyes widened with recognition. The brooch had belonged to her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, and had been a particular favorite during her later years. Its recovery was not just historically significant, but deeply personal to the current monarch. She held the brooch gently, as if connecting across the centuries with her predecessor. The ceremonial regalia discovered in the buried chest proved to be even more remarkable than initially thought. The Queen examined each piece with the expertise of someone who had been surrounded by royal treasures her entire life. She identified several pieces as being part of a set that had been created for Princess Beatrice, Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, for her role in various court ceremonies. Beatrice never married into another royal family, the Queen explained to the assembled experts, so her ceremonial items would have remained in Britain. But after her death, there was some confusion about where they should be housed. Many of Victoria's daughters had their own collections, and not everything made it into the official inventories. Dr. Worthington's genealogical research had continued overnight, and she presented new findings that further clarified the connection between Camilla's family and the royal treasures. She had discovered letters in the royal archives that explicitly mentioned Margaret Cubitt being entrusted with items of sentimental value following Princess Beatrice's death in 1944. The letter suggested that these items were to be
kept safe until suitable arrangements could be
made. The chaos of World War II had apparently prevented those suitable arrangements from ever being implemented. Margaret Cubitt had dutifully safeguarded the treasures, but as the war ended and the royal household dealt with more pressing matters, the temporary storage arrangement had been forgotten. The items had remained hidden, their existence known only to Margaret and perhaps a few family members who had taken the secret to their graves. The Queen listened to this explanation with great interest, occasionally asking detailed questions about specific dates and people mentioned in the documents. Her memory for royal history was legendary, and she was able to provide context and additional information that helped fill in gaps in the story. She recalled her grandmother, Queen Mary, mentioning concerns about missing items from Victoria's collection. But those concerns had been overshadowed by the demands of modern royal life. The excavation in the garden had continued overnight under floodlights, and by the morning of the Queen's visit, archaeologists had uncovered what appeared to be a complete Victorian-era storage facility. The building had been constructed specifically for housing valuable items, with thick stone walls and a sophisticated ventilation system that had helped preserve whatever was stored inside. As the Queen toured the excavation site, archaeologists were in the process of opening what appeared to be a vault built into the foundation of the building. The vault was sealed with a heavy iron door that bore the royal cipher of Queen Victoria. When the door was finally opened, the contents revealed the full scope of what had been hidden at Ray Mill House for over a century. Inside the vault were dozens of items that appeared to span several decades of Victoria's reign. There were paintings by court artists, including several portraits of royal children and landscapes of royal residences. There were books bound in leather and gold, many bearing personal inscriptions from Victoria herself. Most remarkably, there were numerous pieces of jewelry, including what appeared to be complete parures, matching sets of necklaces, earrings, bracelets, and brooches. The Queen examined these items with growing amazement. Many were pieces she recognized from descriptions in royal inventories, while others were completely unknown to modern historians. The collection represented not just monetary value, but a unique window into the personal tastes and relationships of her Victorian predecessors. One discovery in particular moved the Queen deeply. Among the books was a leather-bound diary that appeared to have belonged to Princess Beatrice. The diary contained personal reflections on royal life, family relationships, and the challenges of being a Victorian princess. In one entry, dated shortly before her death, Beatrice had written about her decision to entrust certain treasures to dear Margaret, explaining that she wanted to ensure they would be safe from the uncertainties of war and politics. As the day progressed, it became clear that the discoveries at Ray Mill House represented one of the most significant archaeological finds related to the British royal family in modern history. The items filled in crucial gaps in the historical record and provided unprecedented insights into the personal lives of Victorian royals. The Queen spent the entire day at the property, showing a level of personal involvement that surprised even her closest advisors. She participated in discussions about conservation methods, asked detailed questions about authentication procedures, and even helped to carefully unpack some of the more delicate items from their protective wrappings. As evening approached, the Queen gathered the entire team together for an impromptu ceremony. In recognition of their extraordinary work and the historical significance of their discoveries, she personally thanked each team member and announced that the findings would be properly studied and eventually displayed for the public to enjoy. Standing in Camillas' sitting room, surrounded by treasures that had been hidden for over a century, the Queen reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had led to this moment. A routine property assessment had uncovered one of the most important treasure troves in royal history, and the woman who had unknowingly safeguarded these items had become part of an extraordinary story that connected the present royal family directly to their Victorian past. The fifth day brought revelations that would reshape the understanding of Queen Victoria's reign and the true extent of the royal collection. International experts had arrived overnight, including specialists from the Victoria and Albert Museum, the British Museum, and even representatives from the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, who had flown in specifically to examine what was being called the most significant royal discovery of the modern era. Dr. Clarissa Pemberton, the world's leading expert on Victorian royal jewelry, had spent the night examining the pieces discovered in the vault. Her preliminary assessment was staggering. She estimated that the collection contained over 200 individual items, many of which had been thought lost forever. The monetary value was almost impossible to calculate, but more importantly, the historical significance was immeasurable. What we have here, Dr. Pemberton explained to the assembled team, is essentially a time capsule of Victorian royal life. These aren't just valuable objects. They're personal items that tell the story of a family, a reign, and an era. Some of these pieces were gifts between family members. Others were created for specific ceremonies or celebrations. Together, they provide an unprecedented glimpse into the private world of Queen Victoria and her family. Among the most remarkable discoveries was a complete set of jewelry that had been created to commemorate the Diamond Jubilee of 1897. The set included a tiara featuring diamonds arranged to spell out Victoria in script, matching earrings, a necklace, and several brooches. Historical records had mentioned the creation of such a set, but it had been assumed that the pieces had been broken up and the stones reused for other projects. The tiara, when carefully cleaned and examined, proved to be even more spectacular than the historical descriptions had suggested. The diamonds were of exceptional quality, and the craftsmanship displayed the pinnacle of Victorian jewelry making. Dr. Pemberton estimated that it would have taken master craftsmen several months to complete such a piece, and the cost would have been enormous even by royal standards. Princess Anne arrived unexpectedly in the afternoon, having heard about the discoveries from her brother Charles. Known for her practical nature and deep interest in history, she was particularly fascinated by the everyday items that had been found alongside the obvious treasures. Among these were personal effects that painted a picture of Victorian royal life beyond the formal ceremonies and state occasions. There were children's toys that had belonged to Victoria's grandchildren, including elaborate dollhouses and miniature carriages. There were personal letters between family members, written in the informal style reserved for private correspondence. Most touching were the items that suggested the deep emotional bonds within the royal family, including lockets containing photographs and hair jewelry made from the hair of deceased family members, a common Victorian mourning practice. One discovery that particularly moved Princess Anne was a collection of watercolor paintings created by Queen Victoria herself. The Queen had been an accomplished artist, and these paintings showed a more personal side of the monarch. They depicted family scenes, beloved pets, and quiet moments at royal residences. Several paintings showed Victoria's children at play, capturing the informal family life that existed behind the grandeur of royal protocol. The archaeological team had continued their excavation of the buried building and made another significant discovery. Beneath the main vault, they found evidence of an even older structure, possibly dating to the Georgian period. This suggested that the site had been used for storing valuable items for much longer than initially thought, possibly spanning several reigns. Initial exploration of this deeper level revealed items that appeared to date from the reigns of George III and George IV. There were pieces of furniture, paintings, and decorative objects that showed the evolution of royal taste and craftsmanship over several decades. The discovery suggested that the Cubitt family property had served as a kind of unofficial royal repository for generations. Dr. Worthington's genealogical research had uncovered even more remarkable connections. She had discovered that the Cubitt family had been involved in construction work for several royal residences during the Victorian era. This explained not only their proximity to the royal family, but also their trusted status as keepers of royal property. The family had been more than just neighbors to royalty. They had been integral to the maintenance and expansion of the royal estate. The most emotionally powerful discovery of the day came when conservators opened a sealed wooden box that had been found in Princess Beatrice's personal effects. Inside was a collection of items that told the story of Victoria's relationship with her youngest daughter, who had served as her constant companion in the Queen's later years. The box contained locks of hair from various family members, each carefully labeled and dated. There were photographs of family gatherings, many showing Victoria in informal moments that contrasted sharply with her official portraits. Most remarkably, there was a handwritten letter from Victoria to Beatrice, written shortly before the Queen's death, in which she expressed her love for her daughter and her wishes for how certain personal items should be distributed after her death. In the letter, Victoria specifically mentioned her desire that the most precious personal items should be kept safe by those we trust, rather than being added to the official royal collection. This explained not only why these items had ended up in private hands, but also why their removal had been intentional rather than accidental. The letter provided the missing link that historians had long sought to understand the disposition of Victoria's personal property after her death. While the official royal regalia and state treasures had been properly transferred to her successor, Edward VII, many personal items had been distributed according to her private wishes, often to trusted friends and loyal servants who had served the royal family faithfully. As news of the discoveries continued to spread, Ray Mill House became the focus of international attention. Media crews from around the world had gathered outside the property, and security had been increased to protect both the ongoing investigation and the privacy of those involved. The palace press office was working carefully to manage the release of information while ensuring that the historical significance of the finds was properly communicated to the public. Camilla found herself thrust into an entirely unexpected role as the central figure in one of the most important historical discoveries of recent times. The quiet woman who had simply wanted to enjoy her country retreat was now fielding calls from museums, historians, and documentarians from around the world, all eager to learn more about the treasures that had been hidden in her home. The emotional impact of the discoveries was profound for all members of the royal family. These weren't just valuable antiques. They were family heirlooms that connected the current generation directly to their Victorian ancestors. Each item told a story about relationships, celebrations, sorrows, and the everyday life of a family that happened to be at the center of British history. Prince Charles returned in the evening with Prince William and Catherine, who were eager to see the discoveries for themselves. The younger generation of royals was particularly fascinated by the children's items and the informal family photographs, which showed their ancestors in a way that formal portraits never could. As the team prepared for another night of careful conservation and documentation work, the full scope of what had been discovered was beginning to become clear. Ray Mill House had yielded not just individual treasures, but an entire collection that would fundamentally change historians' understanding of the Victorian royal family and provide the public with an unprecedented glimpse into the private world of Britain's longest reigning monarch. The sixth day dawned with a sense of anticipation mixed with melancholy, as everyone involved realized that the extraordinary journey of discovery was approaching its conclusion. The archaeological team had worked through the night to complete their excavation of the site, and conservators had carefully documented and packaged the final items from the deepest levels of the buried vault. Dr. Richard Blackwood, a specialist in royal documentation from the Windsor Castle archives, arrived with a team of researchers carrying boxes of historical records that had been hastily retrieved from various royal repositories. The overnight research had yielded a treasure trove of documents that provided context for many of the discoveries at Ray Mill House. Among the most significant documents was Queen Victoria's private will, written in her own hand, which had been stored separately from her official testament. This personal document revealed her specific wishes for the distribution of items that she considered too personal or sentimental for the official royal collection. The will explicitly mentioned trusted, friends of long standing who were to receive items of personal significance, to be kept in their families as tokens of our enduring affection. The document specifically named Margaret Cubitt as one of these trusted friends, authorizing her to receive such personal items as our daughter Beatrice shall deem appropriate, to be held in safekeeping for future generations. This discovery finally provided the legal and historical justification for why these royal treasures had ended up in private hands, removing any question about their rightful ownership. Camilla read the document with tears in her eyes, realizing that her family had been entrusted with this responsibility by Queen Victoria herself. The weight of that trust, maintained unknowingly for over a century, was both humbling and overwhelming. She began to understand that her family had been the guardians of royal history, carrying out a sacred duty across multiple generations. The final major discovery came when archaeologists completed their excavation of the Georgian-era foundation they had uncovered. In the deepest part of the site, they found a lead-lined chest that bore the royal arms of George III. Inside this chest were items that predated even the Victorian treasures, including pieces that had belonged to King George III and Queen Charlotte. Among these earlier treasures was a magnificent pocket watch that had belonged to George III, engraved with scenes from his coronation. There were also several pieces of jewelry that had belonged to Queen Charlotte, including a diamond bracelet that had been a wedding gift from her husband. Most remarkably, there was a small painting by Thomas Gainsborough that appeared to be a private portrait of the royal couple with their children. These Georgian discoveries suggested that the tradition of entrusting royal items to the Cubitt family had begun much earlier than anyone had imagined. Dr. Worthington's research revealed that the Cubitt family had served the royal household in various capacities for generations, building a relationship of trust that spanned multiple reigns. Sir Hugh Roberts, who had returned for this final day of discoveries, was astounded by the breadth and significance of the collection. In his decades of service to the royal collection, he had never encountered anything comparable. What we have here, he explained to the gathered experts, is essentially a parallel royal collection that has been preserved in perfect condition for generations. These items fill in gaps in the historical record that we never even knew existed. The emotional centerpiece of the final days discoveries was a collection of personal letters, from Queen Victoria to Margaret Cubitt, spanning several decades of their friendship. The letters revealed a side of Victoria that was rarely seen in official documents, warm, affectionate, and deeply grateful for the loyalty and discretion of her friend. In one particularly moving letter, dated shortly after Prince Albert's death in 1861, Victoria wrote, "My dear Margaret, your presence and understanding during these dark days has been a source of great comfort. I know that I can trust you with matters closest to my heart, as you have proven yourself to be not merely a friend, but a sister in all but blood." These letters provided unprecedented insight into Victoria's personal relationships and her reliance on a network of trusted friends who supported her through the challenges of her long reign. They also explained why she had felt comfortable entrusting personal treasures to the Cubitt family, knowing that they would be treated with the respect and care they deserved. As the day progressed, the focus shifted from discovery to preservation and planning. Each item needed to be properly conserved, cataloged, and studied. Decisions had to be made about where the treasures would be housed and how they would be made available for scholarly research and public viewing. Queen Elizabeth II returned for this final day, bringing with her several other senior members of the royal family, including the Duke of Edinburgh, Princess Alexandra, and the Duke of Gloucester. The gathering felt like a family reunion, centered around the rediscovery of their shared heritage. The Queen announced that the treasures would be incorporated into the royal collection, but with special recognition of their unique provenance and the role of the Cubitt family in preserving them. A new wing of the Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace would be dedicated to displaying these items, telling not just the story of the treasures themselves but also the remarkable tale of their century-long safekeeping. Camilla was formally recognized for her family's role in preserving this irreplaceable piece of British history. The Queen presented her with a specially commissioned brooch featuring sapphires and diamonds arranged in a design that incorporated elements from several of the discovered pieces. The gesture was both a personal token of gratitude and a formal acknowledgement of the Cubitt family's service to the Crown. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, as word of the discoveries spread through royal and aristocratic circles. Many came to pay their respects to Camilla and to see firsthand the treasures that had been hidden in her home. The atmosphere was festive yet respectful, befitting the historical significance of the occasion. Media coverage of the discoveries had reached a crescendo, with news outlets around the world reporting on what was being called the greatest royal archaeological discovery of the modern era. Documentary filmmakers were already planning projects to tell the story of the find, and several museums had expressed interest in hosting traveling exhibitions of the treasures. As evening approached, a sense of completion settled over Ray Mill House. The excavation site had been carefully backfilled and the garden restored to its original condition. The last of the treasures had been carefully packed for transport to Windsor Castle, where they would undergo detailed conservation and study. Camilla stood in her sitting room, which had been transformed back to its original appearance after serving as a temporary conservation laboratory for nearly a week. The only evidence of the extraordinary events that had taken place was the memory of what had been discovered and the knowledge that her family had played a crucial role in preserving an irreplaceable piece of British history. The discoveries at Ray Mill House had not only revealed lost treasures but had also strengthened the bonds between past and present, connecting the current royal family to their Victorian and Georgian ancestors in a deeply personal way. The treasures would soon find their way to public galleries and scholarly collections, but they would always be remembered as the hidden legacy that emerged from a quiet countryside home, preserved by a family's century-long commitment to an almost forgotten trust. 6 months after the remarkable discoveries at Ray Mill House, the world was finally able to witness the full magnitude of what had been found. The newly opened Victoria's Hidden Legacy exhibition at the Queen's Gallery drew visitors from around the globe, each eager to see the treasures that had been hidden for over a century and to learn the extraordinary story of their preservation. Camilla stood before the main display case, still finding it difficult to believe that these magnificent items had been in her home all along. The centerpiece of the exhibition was the Diamond Jubilee tiara, displayed under carefully controlled lighting that made the diamonds sparkle like captured starlight. Beside it, the portrait miniature of Queen Victoria seemed to watch over the collection with the same dignified presence she had maintained during her 63-year reign. The exhibition had been designed to tell not just the story of the treasures themselves, but the remarkable tale of how they had been preserved. Interactive displays allowed visitors to experience the excitement of the discovery process, from the initial examination of the writing desk to the final excavation of the Georgian vault. Video interviews with team members, including Dr. Thornfield and the archaeologists, provided first-hand accounts of the investigation. Queen Elizabeth II had personally opened the exhibition, delivering a speech that praised the dedication of the Cubitt family and emphasized the importance of preserving historical heritage. "These treasures remind us," she had said, "that history is not merely about grand gestures and public ceremonies, but about the quiet dedication of individuals who understand their responsibility to future generations." The scholarly impact of the discoveries had been immense. Dr. Pemberton had published a comprehensive catalog of the jewelry pieces, which had already become an essential reference for historians studying Victorian royal culture. The personal letters between Queen Victoria and Margaret Cubitt had provided new insights into the Queen's private life and her relationships with those outside the immediate royal circle. Universities around the world were incorporating the discoveries into their curricula, using them as case studies in archaeology, history, and museum studies. The story of Ray Mill House had become a perfect example of how historical treasures could survive in unexpected places and how ordinary families could play extraordinary roles in preserving cultural heritage. The economic impact had been significant as well. Tourism to the area around Ray Mill House had increased dramatically, with visitors hoping to catch a glimpse of the property where such remarkable discoveries had been made. Local businesses had benefited from the increased attention, and the Royal Borough had established a heritage trail that included information about the discoveries and their historical context. Camilla had handled her newfound fame with characteristic grace and dignity. She had given several carefully managed interviews, always emphasizing her family's role as custodians rather than owners of the treasures. She had also established a small museum in a building on her property, displaying copies of some of the documents and photographs that told the story of her family's connection to the royal household. The conservation work on the treasures had revealed even more secrets. Advanced imaging techniques had uncovered hidden inscriptions on several pieces, including personal messages from Queen Victoria to her children and grandchildren. Chemical analysis of the materials had provided new information about Victorian jewelry making techniques and the sources of precious stones used in royal commissions. One of the most moving discoveries had been made during the conservation of Princess Beatrice's diary. Between the pages, conservators had found pressed flowers that the princess had collected during walks with her mother. Each flower had been carefully labeled with the date and location where it was picked, creating a botanical record of the Queen's final years. The international response to the discoveries had been overwhelming. Museums in France, Germany, and other European countries had loaned related items for the exhibition, creating the most comprehensive display of Victorian royal artifacts ever assembled. The cooperation between institutions had fostered new relationships and joint research projects that would continue for years to come. Dr. Worthington's genealogical research had continued to yield fascinating results. She had traced the Cubitt family's service to the royal household back to the reign of George II, revealing a relationship that had spanned nearly 2 centuries. This long association explained not only why the family had been trusted with such valuable items, but also why the tradition of safekeeping had been maintained across multiple generations. The technological aspects of the discovery had also attracted attention from archaeological and conservation professionals worldwide. The techniques used to locate and excavate the buried vault had been refined and were now being applied to other historical sites. The Ray Mill House project had become a model for how modern technology could be used to uncover hidden historical treasures. Prince William and Catherine had become particularly involved in ensuring that the story of the discoveries would be preserved for future generations. They had commissioned a comprehensive documentary that would be released to schools and educational institutions, helping to inspire young people to appreciate their historical heritage and consider careers in archaeology and conservation. The personal impact on Camilla had been profound. She had always known that her family had connections to the royal household, but she had never imagined the depth and significance of those relationships. The discoveries had given her a new understanding of her own family history and a deeper appreciation for the responsibility that came with preserving cultural heritage. As she walked through the exhibition, greeting visitors and answering questions about the discoveries, Camilla reflected on the incredible journey that had begun with a simple bureaucratic letter. What had started as an unwanted intrusion into her private life had become one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in modern British history. The treasures themselves were now safely preserved for future generations, but their discovery had created something even more valuable, a renewed understanding of the importance of preserving historical heritage and the role that ordinary people could play in safeguarding the past for the future. The final display in the exhibition featured a recreation of the moment when the first chest was opened, complete with the actual tools used by the conservators, and a video showing Dr. Thornfield's reaction to seeing the treasures for the first time. Visitors often paused at this display, moved by the emotion and excitement captured in that historic moment. As evening fell and the exhibition closed for the day, Camilla made her way back to Ray Mill House, which had returned to its peaceful existence as a country retreat. The garden showed no signs of the archaeological excavation that had taken place there, but the knowledge of what had been discovered beneath those lawns would remain forever. The story of the royal treasures hidden at Ray Mill House had captured the imagination of people around the world, proving that history could still surprise and delight us. It had shown that extraordinary discoveries could be made in the most ordinary places, and that the responsibility for preserving our cultural heritage belonged not just to institutions and governments, but to every individual who understood the value of the past. In the end, the greatest treasure discovered at Ray Mill House was not any single item, no matter how valuable or beautiful, but the reminder that we are all custodians of history, charged with preserving the stories and artifacts of our past for those who will come after us. Camilla's family had fulfilled that responsibility unknowingly for over a century, and their dedication had ensured that these magnificent pieces of British royal history would continue to inspire and educate people for generations to come.